Okay, welcome everybody to the CGHS research webinars. The webinars are hosted by the Public Health Department of CGHS. The special webinar is also co-hosted by the CGH Committee on Scholarship and Research. Our speaker today is Dr. Robert Faff from the University of Queensland Business School in St. Lucia, near Brisbane, Australia. Dr. Faff has an international reputation in empirical finance research. He's secured 13 Australian Research Council grants with funding exceeding $4 million. He has over 300 refereed journal publications and career citations of more than 10,000, nearly 11,000. His particular passion is nurturing and developing the career trajectories of early career researchers. Robert has supervised more than 30 PhD students to successful completion and examined 50 PhD dissertations. Building on a 35-year academic career, his latest passion is pitching research. Pitching research is now gaining great traction domestically and worldwide, as exemplified by nearly 11,000 downloads, over 220 pitching talks for events at 37 Australian universities and spanning 46 different countries worldwide. In addition, Robert is editor-in-chief of the Pacific Basin Finance Journal and was the former editor of Accounting and Finance. Okay. And so with that, Robert, I'm going to hand it over to you. Let's make sure you're unmuted. There you go.
Good. Thank you very much, Marsha. Welcome to everyone. Thanks so much for all your help, Marsha, in setting this up. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to share my passion with those that are joining the webinar. And I also should give a thanks to Lee, who I met, I think, in Atlanta last year at the big management conference. So I'll go into slide mode, and Marsha, if anything goes, whoops. So we've certainly started with a little glitch. I'll go into slide mode and actually get the very first slide to show. So if anything goes amiss, Marsha's going to jump in and help us fix it up. Very quickly, I want to dwell on this slide, and these slides are being made available to you at some stage in terms of the PowerPoints. And so in this mode, there are quite a few links that you can click that will take you to various places. And this page, the very first one, has two what I think are absolutely essential links for you to utilize. And these are links to the two papers that will give you at your fingertips a record of more detail and guidance and resources around this topic of pitching research. So if you are at all intrigued by this, you're interested, you find that there could be something here to help you, and I believe there can, in terms of starting out on the research journey and a communication between us, if I can join your group as researchers with ideas, and we want to sell that to our colleagues or our mentors. How do we do that? How do we do that in a way that can engage with them effectively? So very briefly, the plan of the webinar at its most basic level, quite quickly I'll speed to the first of two videos, YouTube videos that will play. Both of these videos are about 9 minutes long, and the first one is an animation which just gives in a very I think friendly way and a humorous way gives the elements and essence of what this framework is, what this tool is. I'll bridge with a few comments on that, but I'll have to be brief in my commentary, conscious of time. will then segue into an example. And I've chosen a videoed example from a student here at the University of Queensland on a topic that I believe, as much as it can be, is very relevant to the type of research that you do at your university. So it's a health-related topic, and I hope you enjoy that. Subject to time, I'll maybe highlight a few other things about the framework. I'll cherry pick these slides. There are many slides in the deck. I thought I'd give you the big deck that you could look at your leisure later on. I'll point you to some resources near the end of the webinar, and hopefully there will also be time for question and answer. But Marsha, if you think that somehow I'm pushing up against time, just give me a little friendly kick, and I'm sure we'll be on track. Okay, hopefully everyone's seen the transition of the slide. Your research journey starts here. I'd like to thank the Business School and University of Queensland for continuing to support me on this journey. They've been incredibly supportive, and so I don't think I could feel like the time that I put into sharing with you would be valued unless they were behind me. So I'm very, very appreciative. So I guess it's already been stated, but let me just say it on this slide quite clearly, the objective. We want to communicate our research ideas to an academic expert. Now, there's a more challenging type of communication that I won't help you with today, and that's to communicate our ideas to the community. Incredibly important, incredibly challenging, but I think unless we can communicate our ideas to an academic expert in the field, then any of that other communication really is just going to be a little bit of a dream. So it's a difficult task, an incredibly difficult task made easier, and that's what I want to help you with today. So the basis of how this help will materialize is around a tool. It's a template tool, it's a framework, and if I had to give it a few descriptors, they're on this slide. It's structured, it's simple, it's methodical, it's clear, and it's focused. And if you use it in a serious and sensible way, you can come up with something that's meaningful and relevant that will engage with your target audience, your mentor, the expert in the field. So this probably pretty much gets us to the point where I want to play the first 9-minute video. It's an animation, and it will essentially, in a brief, friendly way, explain what will clearly be a fairly simple framework, but I think an incredibly powerful one. So without any further ado, I will hopefully get this video playing.
Hi, I'm Robert Faff, Professor of Finance at the University of Queensland Business School. You'll come to know me as the Pitch Doctor. Researchers make systematic and rigorous inquiry into things. It is immensely rewarding and important work, but definitely not easy. New researchers often have trouble getting started and maintaining focus in a sea of information. Supervisors are there to help, but their time is limited. Wouldn't it be great to have a systematic method for keeping yourself on track and getting the most out of the time you have with your supervisor? The pitch template is designed to distill your idea down to the key elements, making it easier to first clarify your own thinking and then to communicate to others. Identifying and articulating the essential details helps to start a conversation, allowing you and your supervisor to get the most out of the research process. You can also use the pitch template as a way to quickly deconstruct and record the important elements of research articles you are reading. Using the pitch template to reverse engineer the research of others will give you excellent knowledge of the leading approaches in your field. The pitch template is a living document that can and should be updated as you hone your ideas. It is designed to shape your thinking around what is most important and guide you from initial stages to final write-up. Let's take a look at the key areas of your research that are identified and outlined in the pitch template. What is the pitch template? First, your project needs a meaningful classification. Start by providing a working title and some key information on the research problem and background. Your working title will probably change over the life of the project. To start with, think short, 8 words or less, and informative. You can make it seductive and searchable later on. Next, you need a key research question, the overarching question that guides the research. When you are framing your research question, try asking yourself these questions. What is your overarching discipline? Is it finance, marketing, etc.? Start at the top and funnel down through smaller and smaller sub-disciplines to position your problem within a precise area. What is your paradigm? What is the broad field you are positioning your problem in? That is, the philosophical perspective. And what are the underlying assumptions and language required for this paradigm? What is your focus? Are you pursuing a descriptive, predictive, or analytical approach? In the next section of the template, you identify key research papers. Choose the 3 key articles that have most helped you clarify your thinking. These may change across the course of your research project, but it is important to always have an understanding of how you plan to fit your research into the broader literature. Next comes motivation. In this section you explain what are the scholarly factors driving your study. Motivation can come from real-world phenomena, the requirement for a new theory or model, or stakeholder needs. How should I organise my research thoughts? It's as easy as 3, 2, 1. Now that you have defined and positioned your research problem, you need to focus on the key specifics of how the research will be conducted. 3. There are 3 basic building blocks: idea, data, tools. Your idea is a central statement that connects your research question and your motivation, and, if possible or relevant, hints at your central hypothesis. It should be a statement that provides insight into the idea as a whole. Next, you consider your data. When thinking about data, there are 2 areas to contemplate: what you need and what is possible to reasonably access or collect. With data, we can think of it as having a demand side and a supply side. On the demand side, what data do you need to answer your research problem? Is it possible to collect the data you need? What sample will be required? What sample size will be adequate? And what will be desirable? The supply side. What data are available? Is it possible to access? Who needs to supply the data, and is this viable? Are there ethical or other constraints to producing the sample? The data section of the template will help you assess the feasibility of the project, as well as highlighting issues that may need to be worked out with your research mentor before you start your data collection. Tools. Again, think about tools in terms of what you require and what is available. Think of it from the demand and supply side again. Demand side. What tests, tools do you require to answer your problem? Tools can include software programs, materials for data collection, etc. How will you access these tools? Supply side. What tools do you have access to? Are there other people or organisations that could facilitate access to tools that you require? 2. There are 2 key questions. The first question is, what's new? This is your chance to show the novelty of your project and why you're excited about it. Is it the first to achieve something? Does it solve a problem? The second question is, so what? This section is about why the research will be important to others, especially to your academic tribe. Think about the implications for the discipline and key stakeholders in the motivation section. What will change once someone reads your paper? Will they think or act differently? 1. There is one bottom line. The bottom line is contribution. Think broadly about the contribution you are trying to make to the existing research and write an overall statement that encapsulates what you hope to achieve. Other considerations. This section is for any other issues that will have a bearing on your research. What are your target journals for publication? What are the research-related risks? Is it possible someone else is already conducting your research? Are there risks associated with the research process itself, such as ethical concerns or feasibility issues? Finally, think about what role your personal assumptions and expectations could play in the outcome. Avoid designing a test that almost certainly will give you the answer that you desperately want to be true. Your approach should be objectively scientific, that is, open-minded and inquisitive, rather than aiming to confirm your personal faith. Now that we've gone through the pitch template, what can we conclude? First, the pitch template provides a simple and flexible tool to guide you through all important considerations when conceptualizing and designing a research project. Second, by taking the time to methodically work through each section and keeping within the guideline of 1,000 words, you will have all your thoughts organised succinctly for a meaningful discussion with your mentor. Remember, less is more, and by using the template, structured less is even more. Third, over time, using the template will make you a more efficient and effective researcher. You'll be able to conceptualise and define aspects of a proposed research project more quickly, giving you confidence. You'll also develop an understanding of your own research strengths and weaknesses. This knowledge will form the basis of your program of skill development. Most importantly, you will be able to optimise the time you have with your research mentor, ensuring each meeting moves your research project meaningfully forward, even when your research mentor is time poor or grumpy. For more information on the pitch template, go to the SSRN and access the latest version of pitching research at the following web address, and also the web portal pitchmyresearch.com.
Okay, so I'll stop it there. And I'll just make sure I close that tab because YouTube has a very bad habit of starting to play another video, which we don't really need at this stage. So if I can just go back to the slides. So hopefully that in a 9-minute slot gives you a fairly good idea of all the elements that are in the framework. It's not possible in 9 minutes to really go through the nuanced parts of it, and we'll touch on some of those as best we can in the short time we have available. But the go-to is really the paper itself, the paper on SSRN, free to download, and I'd strongly urge you to grab that because I poured all my possible thinking into the words on the pages, and I think that's really a great resource. As the cartoon character and animation said, there's a variety of things that are simple slogans, if you like, that I've put in there purposely, not to distract us, but to stick in one's mind. And the cartoon talked about a 3-2-1, but in fact, it's like there's a 4-3-2-1 process here. So there, the slide just shows you a vanilla version of the template. So this is prior to, obviously, any action taking place. If I were a new student or new research student thinking, wow, okay, I want to convey in a sharp, focused way my thoughts, this is the framework that I've got to use. How am I going to go about populating it for my situation? So the first 4 items that I've highlighted in yellow on the screen, working title, basic research question, key papers and motivation and puzzle. If I were to emphasize one thing that wasn't really captured so clearly in the video, this is the framing part. This is, in my mind at least, the way I would like it to be used, is the opportunity for the novice researcher to give the big picture. This is setting things up for, in the remaining elements, to drill down to what your project is about, but frame it for me first. I won't talk about any of these due to time, but there's just a couple of ideas here around how one might think through the particular items for the first four. Then we have the building blocks, as we saw in the animation. And again, there's a couple of things there just to think about. This is now, as a package, these are the first three things I would look to really see whether a student can, or a young scholar can convince me that their potential research project has some legs, actually has some merit. And guess what? If I don't quite agree with what they're telling me here, I'm going to ask some questions. And this is a really good prompter for me to look at particular things that in other settings where there isn't this structure, I might think of these things, but likely I wouldn't, or I wouldn't do it in as quick and an effective way. So it's about starting a conversation. I don't expect a perfect pitch from a student. I think if it is anything like a perfect pitch, they've probably overinvested in using the tool. So I like to think of it as set yourself a reasonable and challenging task and time period. Do the best you can in that time period, knowing it won't be perfect. You bring this to your meeting, it starts a conversation, and you get guidance early before you go down paths that you shouldn't be going down and wasting time on. So when we get to the two package, the two-dimensional package, these go together. So there's no point telling me about something that's new and novel if you can't convince me that it's important in some sense, or vice versa. You tell me about something that's really important, it takes my breath away, and then we realize it's not that new and novel. That thing that takes my breath away has actually been already done and established in the literature. So again, as a package, I look at those and think, well, are you getting me across the line? And if, as I'm having a conversation with that young scholar, this will prompt comment. Maybe I'll say, wow, you know, this is fantastic. There are, you know, what you've said here is great. More likely, I will either be still a little confused and have some questions to try and lift the fog, or I just don't agree. And it's a very nice device and framework for demonstrating and starting that conversation about, well, what is it about what you're telling me I don't quite get, I don't quite like, and we hopefully converge to a place where we do agree. The bottom line is contribution. I don't think that would surprise anyone, and to me this is funneling down to that supreme challenge. There's the other considerations which you can read about in the paper, and a little bit of the flavour of that was given to you in the animation. The sorts of things that are top of my mind from a student is, tell me what your expectations are about this paper. In other words, the output, the journal. What do you have in mind? Can you convince me that's the appropriate level? Are you being too ambitious? Are you being not ambitious enough? Anything around scope. I, as a mentor, want to make sure you're not heading down a path towards what might be a no result case. Although in some contexts, no results are interesting and important to know. Competitors, think about the competitors. What about the competitor risk? Try and avoid topics that we can reasonably predict might be obsolete pretty quickly. We don't want to be dabbling in something that could take us many months, and in often cases it does take many months. We don't want it to be a non-issue before we can actually execute the rigour that's necessary. One thing I've left in the slides, which I'll quickly want to pose to you, is, and it's a circumstance I've seen quite a bit, but fortunately not all the time. And that's when I come across a very repetitive pitch. What does that reflect? And one of the things I've got on a slide later is about the connectivity aspect of all of this. And to me, having this 1,000 word focus framework gives us a really good chance of seeing whether everything's connected and it flows. Now, a really trivial and bad case of having very good connection is it just repeats over and over again. And I've had students sort of ask me questions about, well, this item just sounds like that one. What's the difference? And in the paper and in other materials, I try and show and demonstrate what those differences are. And I admit that there will, in some respects, be a degree of contrivance. But I think that contrivance just helps to give us a framework which will work for us. And so a positive attitude needs to be brought to the table. The other thing that I always recommend is find some examples. Find some hopefully good examples where you can see there isn't over repetition. And the novice researcher has put in a bit of time and effort, got reward for it by having a really good pitch of their research. So one possibility you have to put on the table, but you can tell, hopefully you will know that I don't like this one. So a really repetitive pitch, it's a useless tool, a waste of time. To me, it's a diagnostic. I think that's actually telling me there's a weak proposal here, and we don't want a weak proposal. It could tell us a little bit about laziness, and it could tell us about a poor attitude. But for me, it's a missed opportunity. If there is that repetition, it's a missed opportunity. What I use with students, and no time here to tell you about it, but just to quickly put it in your vision, is an application of the tool where it's a reverse engineer into a paper that currently exists. The student chooses a paper that's really important to them. They learn about the framework in exercising a distillation of that information into this framework. And there's a 9-minute video. There's the link. When you get the slides, you don't need to copy this down. You can click on that and it gives you a 9-minute primer, another animation primer on the logic and philosophy around using it as a reverse pitch tool. What I want to quickly get to, so that we're roughly on time, is now to put some relevance and context to this with an example that I believe will make a lot of sense to many of you, even if it's not exactly your field. It's in the health space. And it's a really good pitch. I run a competition at the University of Queensland, university-wide. Shari O'Brien, the pitch you're about to see, 9-minute video, was a winner in 2016 on this topic, training to enhance neuromuscular control of the ankle in cerebral palsy. Bear in mind when we watch the video, she had an extra challenge that is really not relevant to us when we're trying to use it in a private setting. She was trying to win a competition. So there's a little bit of glitz and glamour, and there was an audience, a bigger audience than just being with a mentor. So there are certain parts to the presentation that are not really core to the philosophy. So take those into account, but she does follow the framework. Now, to demonstrate to you what is the content behind the video, I've just got some screenshots here. It's too small. I'm not going to go through this, but you can see from these slides, she has completed the template in about 700 words. So she was quite concise with her thinking and what she displayed in that example. So without further ado, I'm going to play Shari's example for you, and then we'll see how we're going for time.
Right, thank you for the introduction. I'm here from the HABS faculty and in the School of Human Movement and Nutrition Sciences. My working title is Training to Enhance Neuromuscular Control of the Ankle in Cerebral Palsy. So cerebral palsy is a neurological condition. It results from an abnormality or damage to the brain around the time of birth, which results in impairments of movement and posture. Within the lower limb, this greatly affects the capacity to walk, particularly the ability to lift the toes and clear the ground, as you can see here with the right toes dragging along the treadmill belt. So my question is, does active movement training improve neuromuscular control of the ankle in cerebral palsy and transfer to functional tasks? Active movement training is that which requires volitional muscular effort to produce force or a joint position change. And neuromuscular control describes the integration of the nervous system, the brain, and our muscles to produce movement. So what are we dealing with? Well, cerebral palsy results in motor impairment, and this is greatest at the ankle, due to the brain abnormality occurring proximal to these nerve pathways to the ankle. This results in muscle adaptations. So as we can see here, there is reduced muscle volume in the left calf and an equinus foot posture. The heel cannot touch the ground as there has been shortening of muscle fascicles and tendons. Now, traditionally, muscle is the target of exercise interventions, yet this does not address the root cause of the muscle adaptation, which is due to the disruption of the brain. There are neural adaptations. So a few things we do know is that the rate of electrical signals that are being sent to the muscles is reduced. There's variability in the timing of muscles contracting and relaxing, and the capacity to voluntarily activate them is severely reduced. Yet the neural mechanisms behind these changes remain poorly understood, and the capacity for the damaged brain to learn to improve ankle control has not yet been investigated. So there is promising evidence that active modalities can improve neuromuscular control. Cross-sectional studies show a reduced ability to voluntarily activate muscles within the lower limb as much as 20 to 50% in cerebral palsy. However, this has not been assessed post-training in this population. So research has shown that following resistance exercise in healthy populations, this capacity to voluntarily activate muscles can be improved. As I've already mentioned, one of the greatest challenges for individuals with CP is tripping due to reduced ability to dorsiflex or lift the toes, as you saw before. Explosive resistance training in the lower limb has been shown to improve the rate that muscles produce force, as well as the extent of toe lift during walking. Even daily walking has been shown to improve the amount of toe lift achieved, as well as coherence in the muscle that is responsible for this movement in the cerebral palsy population. So whilst all these papers show some favourable and very positive findings, the neural measures, if they are performed, are done so in isolation, and they're using resistance training to target muscle adaptations and not the brain, which is the root cause of the movement impairment. So I intend to implement a novel motor training intervention based on motor learning principles, where participants are required to do two tasks. One, moving the ankle, and the other with the ankle in a fixed position, applying a force to trace along a line. So participants will be presented with this black line, a random trace, and they will have to move their ankle position to match it as accurately as possible. So the expected ankle position is shown here in red, and participants are given an accuracy score following each trial. So this training will be performed for 6 weeks, 3 times weekly, 30 minutes of training. And it's hypothesised that this active movement training will improve ankle position control and joint movement accuracy, which will in turn increase ankle power production and the ability to lift the toes while walking. To test this hypothesis, I will recruit 20 individuals aged 15 to 25 with spastic hemiplegic type cerebral palsy. Testing will occur across 3 time points through 3 different domains. Neuromuscular control will be assessed by recording electrical muscle activity during electrical stimulation and strength measures, which will allow me to assess changes in neural activity and function, which is currently not understood. Selective motor control measures have been included because they are directly transferable out of research and into clinical practice for use by allied health professionals to assist and assess rehabilitation. Function will be assessed using 3D motion analysis, force plates, and musculoskeletal models to see if the motor learning will enhance walking. specifically that ability to lift the toes, to produce propulsion, and for gait speed. A single group acting as their own controls will be used, as this has been shown to reduce variability in heterogeneous samples, which the condition of cerebral palsy is. Recruitment will be primarily sought through the cerebral palsy register. In addition, social media and contacts with rehabilitation clinics will be utilised. I currently have extensive experience with the techniques and the equipment that will be used, and we have this on site in our lab. In addition to this, I've been developing skills in building custom software and an equipment prototype, along with learning new specialised analysis software and the statistics required to carry out this project. So what's new? This study will use a novel training task which is specific to the control required to walk. It targets the brain, that is, which is responsible for the motor impairment observed within this neurological condition, and not the secondary adaptations that occur to muscle morphology, which all the previous literature has investigated. Previous studies that do use neural measures do so in isolation. So here I will use a combination of neural assessments to gain a greater insight into the potential mechanisms possible for the intervention outcomes. So what? Well, these individuals have reduced walking ability and trip over their own toes due to reduced ankle function, and this can worsen throughout life. This study will provide crucial information on how this type of novel motor training could maintain or improve neural function at the most impaired joint, the ankle, as we don't currently understand the neural mechanisms behind their impaired movement. So this study will contribute to a greater insight into neural mechanisms of motor impairment within the lower limb. Positive outcomes may contribute to the development of new, effective and targeted rehabilitation protocols, which can be implemented not just in children, but in adolescents and adults, in order to improve neuromuscular control and therefore walking ability in these individuals with cerebral palsy. Some additional considerations. The equipment I'm building will be portable to increase accessibility and participation in this study. The risks are deemed to be low as the measures are non-invasive and require the participant to produce voluntary muscle activity and movement, and all sessions will be supervised. There is a low risk of no result, as improvements in this training task are expected, given what is known about the principles of motor learning in humans. There is low to nil risk that this research is obsolete, due to the fact that minimal data has been published on neural assessments following active training modalities in cerebral palsy. And in addition, that this condition affects so many individuals. It's the leading cause of childhood disability in Australia and is present throughout their life. So there is a high demand for effective neurorehabilitation. In summary, this project seeks to establish how the nervous system, which was disrupted at birth, can learn to improve neuromuscular control of the ankle and subsequently walking ability. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me just be very careful that we don't listen to another video. So conscious of time, we will sort of quickly round up, and then I'll get some advice at that stage from Marsha how to proceed. But hopefully now what we've achieved is you got a pretty good understanding of the basic framework at a general level, and we've now seen an application of that to an area that for many of you would be quite familiar, at least in a general sense, around a health-related research project. Shari did a really good job. This is not to mean that, or to say that if she were communicating this with a supervisor, she might not have some challenges or some queries. Now, in this was probably quite a polished idea by the time she got to present it. And one could imagine in earlier stages, if she had this framework, that communication, and starting a conversation argument would come into play. So this slide just tries to capture a few themes. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I've highlighted either bold or in red the things that stand out for me. It's about starting. You've got a specialist target audience. It's written. It's a written sort of thing, but that feeds into the oral and the communication generally. It's really designed for a private setting, although we just saw an example of a public competition. Think of it as within the context of a 30-minute meeting with your mentor or your supervisor. Even if they haven't read your material prior to the meeting, my experience, sadly, that is the norm. In the early part of the meeting, with 1,000 words, with this really concise, focused piece of document, they, as an expert in the field, can absorb it really quickly. It's starting a conversation. I've highlighted in red down the bottom there the connectivity, but not over repetition. The one in the middle, which I quickly need to highlight, is the process is non-linear. Research is non-linear, and that doesn't mean it's random, and we should go about it randomly, but it might seem in this webinar like I'm saying to you, well, it's a very simple message. You start at A, you then go to B, you go to C, and you get to the end, you stop, you finish, and you congratulate yourself. I think the best use of the tool is actually in a non-linear way, where the user figures out which part they're going to go to and whether they go backwards, whether they actually go back and revisit when they realize there's some degree of disconnect. So it is a non-linear process, and that's the best use of the tool. As the animation said, the main message is less is more, but even better than that, it's structured less is even more. And hopefully you understand what I mean by that, having been through to where we are now in the webinar. There's some potential benefits. In terms of resources, we probably won't have time to click on any of these, but all the links there are clickable. So at the top, 2 links to the SSRN papers. On my webpage, my UQ webpage, there's a whole bunch of resources and materials. And hanging off that is the next one, the e-library. So there's over 200 examples. There'll be a few other health-related ones, but there's a really diverse lot of examples there. A website that I'm working on at the moment, pitchingresearch.com. It's still a bit raw and rough at the moment, but it will be polished over time. And it's sort of like the go-to place of anything pitching. And the videos that we've already talked about, pitchmyresearch.com. There's an hour and 9-minute more detailed webinar that really goes through in much more detail all of the elements and gives a lot of insights around advice from my perspective on how to use the template and the framework. The link's there. Obviously, we've got no time to look at that now, but I encourage you and urge you, if you feel you want to work through that. I've got a social media presence, so happy to join up with you on either Twitter or LinkedIn. And there's some measures around engagement and impact. What have we achieved today? We've achieved, from my point of view, an awareness for you individually and collectively in your institution of what I think is a pretty neat and simple tool that can be used individually. What do I want to urge you to do? A deeper awareness. So I challenge you to go in and look at the resources, the SSRN papers and the other resources. Individually, that deeper awareness can transition into use. So I challenge you to use it, and to use it multiple times, and to use it in an iterative and multiple way. Institutionally, my dream would be institutions like yours might consider in some shape or form adopting this for the PhD cohort. I think a really neat adoption of it would be as a stepping stone towards what we call here at the UQ, the proposal stage, where you get confirmed. And so this, I think, would be a really neat tool for getting students to that level. Well, according to me, it's right on 45 past the hour. I've really enjoyed the opportunity for sharing these insights with you about pitching research in this webinar. So I thank you from myself and on behalf of the University of Queensland and the Business School. And I hand over to Marsha to now tell us whether we have any more time, and if we do, how we proceed from here. Thanks, Marsha.
Sure. Yeah, we have plenty more time. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask Dr. Faff, please unmute yourself and ask away.
Well, either my interpretation is I must have done a fabulous job to explain it all. Hopefully that's the case.
I do have a question, if I may.
Yes, of course. Please do. John, is it?
Yes, John Fick. Hi. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if you could share your experiences in using this template for dissertation students, doctoral dissertation students.
Yeah, I guess trying to give a short and sort of interesting answer is challenging on the fly. I mean, I've exposed a lot of students to it, not only the ones I supervise, but I teach a course here called Research Process, and it's got a heavy hand of this pitching stuff, but it goes much further as well. And so I get a diversity of students in there. Even within the business school there's a diversity, and it's a really neat cohort effect where there's different perspectives. I sort of design group work that get them to do fantasy pitches and whatever, but really it's then transitioning towards them trying to put in this succinct way their ideas in their fields. So I've certainly had a lot of anecdotal, positive anecdotal sort of feedback. It's a very individualistic thing, but I sort of can tell, and I go when I think it's working and when it's not. So when they sort of get overly repetitive, that slide sort of to me was a bit of therapy, that I was showing you what my thinking was around the tool. It's not the problem with the tool. Okay, it is a little contrived. I accept that, but it's more an attitude or laziness or just not wanting to come. And there's an investment in time. I think students tell me it's not as easy as they thought it might be. It looks easy on the face of it when you sit down and try and do it, and possibly part of the challenge is this tendency to want to be repetitive. But I think those that do a great job and to me show that they're getting a lot out of it don't have those elements, and I see a lot of positive vibe in the classroom, and I've probably had now over 50 PhD students go through and use it in that setting. When you get them to present to the group for 5 or 8 minutes. For many of them, the ones that don't see it as torture, they actually get a lot of benefit out of it. And even in that classroom setting, we do have a little bit of time to let some pretend feedback, if you like, because there's often not experts in the field, and they're PhD students, and I get a flavour there, as well as when I do it with my own students, for sure, of starting the conversation. And it's not about aiming to be perfect in this, because I think that would chew up far too much time. Set a time limit, do the best you can, and see where it leads you. So I know that's not an entirely good answer, but I've had quite a bit of observation on students, and there's a diversity out there, but largely I see, and I'm biased, a positive outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for the presentation again.
My pleasure. Marsha, are you saying anything? Because you're muted.
Yes, I'm muted. I hadn't said anything.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Dr. Faff, it's Aliwa.
Oh, Leah, good. Lovely to see a still photo of you.
Yeah, I just got my voice back ahead of that cold. So I have a question for you. This tool is useful for both PhD doctoral students and the junior faculty. Have you had experience working with the junior faculty using this tool?
It's been far more limited. It's a good question. I think it's a tougher sell. I have had some. I mean, I've tried to set it up in terms of. I'm just trying to think through the settings. Sort of different events, I guess, where they're seeing not only, or they don't only get an opportunity to pitch to a group of colleagues, but they listen to others pitch as well. I think that one's a bit harder to put a finger on, and a lot of young scholars, you know, they're brimming with confidence, some overconfidence, and they are not as easy an audience to convince that this might be a useful sort of pathway towards a more successful pitch. I think one issue generally for everyone, but maybe them particularly, but also PhD students in a public setting, when it's private, this is not an issue. But whenever I've tried to do things publicly, the obvious issue arises, someone's going to steal my idea. Someone's going to steal my idea, and we've all heard war stories and you know, horrible examples of what seems to be, and there are always many sides to a story, but of ideas being stolen, even if you don't have this type of device. So I think there's a reluctance in a public setting to use it, which I understand. Privately, then, it's much more limited for me, limited opportunity for me to see examples, because it would be limited to the particular projects that I might be involved in. And I've certainly tried to get young scholars to use it, and I think with a degree of success. And one thing about being in academia for a long time, you're a survivor, and somehow people from not just domestically but globally send emails and say, I'd really like to work with you. And now rather than just leaving it open-ended and, you know, send me a draft of something that I'll look at, I would go back and say, all right, in the first instance, pitch it to me in this framework. And I wouldn't say I've been overwhelmed with those examples, because you know, we've all got limited time, but I've seen a few of those examples, and there's been a variability of success, at least in terms of what you think it will lead to as a paper or a possible project. But that's not actually totally the relevant way of viewing this, because the success is, well, did it help short circuit something that might have lingered for much longer and then was a failure? So, success, you know, it might sound perverse for me to say, but there's probably been a few cases like that where the project was a failure, but the use of the tool wasn't a failure because it brought forward what would have been a terminated project anyway. So it saved a lot of heartache, saved a lot of time wasting, and so. And I've never really articulated it like that before, but and it is a little perverse to try and claim success out of a tool that will help us see some bad ideas sooner and scuttle them. So failure is in this sense, or seeing those failures around specific projects is indicative of the success of the tool. But thanks for the question, and thank you for joining in. And again, I appreciate your role in helping make this webinar happen.
Well, thank you. We know it's a 6 o'clock in the morning there, so we appreciate you getting up so early.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Happy to do it. And look, if there's anything that can come sort of follow on sort of event or activity that you think I might be able to help with, I'm very keen and happy to explore what that might be. But I guess we can talk about that offline and let the dust settle. But my pleasure.
I had a question,
Yes,
Dr.
Marcia.
Faff. You mentioned practice pitching, and I'm wondering if students who sort of get together as a group of students as opposed to with their mentor
Yes.
and practice pitching to each other, if that's been a useful way to use this tool.
Yeah, look, I've experimented along those lines probably in a couple of ways, but the one top of mind that I can point you to, and there's a third animation video. It's called Pitch Sparring. And it works really well. And the fantasy pitching thing is another example, which is a video in development, about 6-7 minutes long, and the pitch sparring one as well. So in a nutshell, what I do with the pitch sparring, I team students up into pairs, and the very early exercise, I assign them a paper which I think is challenging enough, but not, so this is early on in their exposure to the framework. And they've got to go away and read the paper independently, mark up the paper and read it with the mindset, how does this work for the pitching framework? So it's a reverse engineer exercise. So they're off doing that, they mark it up, and we set them a little bit, some reasonable time to read a paper, but not, we have to cut it off somewhere. So I suggest, a couple of hours maybe. We get them to come back together after they've done that, and then at their direction, their agreement, they start with an item. And I guess the obvious one might be one of the earlier ones, but it doesn't have to be linear. So it's probably going to be the research question. And so they have marked up from the text what part they think best reflects what the authors are claiming is a research question. So they share that. And they don't always get the same answer, and it's not to say there is a unique right answer. They discuss that, they come to a consensus. And then the idea with this sparring is they continue to share their independent view of what the item is. They discuss it, they think about what the consensus might be. And then as they go through, there might be iteration. They might go back and adjust some of what they'd agreed earlier, and they come in the end to a consensus reverse engineered pitch of that article that they've joined together on. And I think apart from anything else, it to my mind is a good example of peer-to-peer learning. And so it's nice for an instructor to be able to take a breath for a second and let the students basically in a relevant sense learn from each other and teach each other. And the fantasy pitching is another example of group learning where it's not, I've done it in pairs, but the dynamic that comes through in sort of a threesome or a four person fantasy pitch team. I set it up a little bit in my course, and I won't bore you with the details in terms of I seed some ideas, and then I get them, once they know the framework, and a particular 90-minute session is there. We're in the room, we got them in the groups, and I say, all right, in 90 minutes, and in fact, it turns out that the main part of it's in 60 minutes, they as a team have to come up with a fantasy pitch. And they have to be a bit inventive, and I say to them, you're allowed to include some fake things, but remember that's not how real research is done. But for the purpose of for the fantasy pitch, they do that and have fun. So I've got fantasy pitch examples on Star Wars, on other, there's a whole spectrum. Some really get right into it and let their sort of ideas flow, their imagination flow. Others are, they're more cautious, and they're much more grounded in what's fantasy, and they actually end up being interesting pitched ideas that you could imagine possibly someone would go off and do. And they get very animated, and the time pressure is really important. It's a good discipline for them to get their thinking down. So that's two examples, two sort of broad scenarios I use as learning, staged learning exercises to get them to the point where once, assuming they're immersed in the literature, know their own literature, they can then apply it to their particular situation, their research. So, nice question. Thank you.
Before I ask for more questions, I just want to address some things in the chat. Some people are asking about getting the presentation, and I want to let everyone know that once we get it posted, we will be sending out a link to this presentation, the recording, and also the slides that you have sent to me will go out along with that. So everyone will get the presentation that way. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to, you've gotten several thank yous. Someone saying that your presentation was clear and concise. Outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
Wonderful information on a great tool. I will use some of your ideas in working with my doctoral research students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to ask? Okay. Well, it sounds like we've pretty much used up the hour then. Mm-hmm. And as Lewa says, we really appreciate you getting up early in order to present to us. And it was a great useful presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciated the opportunity. This is the sort of thing I like to do more of. Right across the spectrum around the world, and if there's an opportunity to connect with you again, I'd really look forward to it. But thanks for today, and well, we just don't know where we might meet again. So thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.